At 77, Phylicia Rashad sits in her office at Howard University, the weight of decades in the spotlight evident in her measured words. For the first time in years, she's ready to speak openly about what really happened behind the scenes of The Cosby Show, the tensions, the secrets, and the moments that never made it to air. After years of carefully guarded statements and diplomatic responses, America's beloved TV mom is finally ready to reveal the dark truth about the show that made her famous. "What I saw was work and play at work and fun," she said in a recent interview, but there's something in her tone that suggests there's more to the story, something she's been holding back for decades. What really went on during those 8 years? What did the cast know, and when did they know it? And how does someone reconcile being part of television history while grappling with the shadow that now hangs over that legacy? This is the confession that fans have been waiting for. Not just about Bill Cosby, but about the price of perfection, the burden of representation, and what it cost to be the face of America's most beloved TV family. The truth, as Phylicia is finally ready to admit, is far more complicated than anyone imagined. When The Cosby Show premiered in 1984, it wasn't just a sitcom, it was a cultural statement. The Huxtable family represented everything America wanted to believe about progress, success, and the possibility of the American dream. But behind the cameras, the reality was far more complex than the polished image they presented to the world. Phylicia has spent decades protecting that image, defending the show's legacy even when it became painful to do so. But now, in the twilight of her career, she's beginning to acknowledge what many suspected all along, that the pressure to maintain perfection took a toll on everyone involved. The show's set was described by many as family-like, but Phylicia's recent reflections suggest that this family dynamic came with its own complications. "There was always this sense that we were carrying something bigger than ourselves," she admits. "We weren't just actors playing roles, we were representatives of what a black family could be." That's a heavy burden to carry, especially when you're trying to be authentic while also being aspirational. The pressure to maintain the Huxtable image extended far beyond the show itself. Cast members were expected to embody their characters' values in their public lives, to be role models whether they wanted to be or not. For Phylicia, this meant being perpetually gracious, always wise, never controversial, a standard that became increasingly difficult to maintain as the years went on. She reveals that there were moments of tension on set that viewers never saw, creative differences that had to be smoothed over, and personal struggles that had to be hidden behind professional smiles. "We were all dealing with our own challenges," she says, "but the show had to go on. The image had to be preserved." What Phylicia is finally admitting is something that many performers of her generation understand all too well: the crushing weight of being one of the few. As one of the most prominent black women on television, she carried the hopes and expectations of an entire community. Every word she spoke, every gesture she made, was scrutinized not just for its entertainment value, but for what it said about black womanhood in America. This responsibility shaped every aspect of her performance as Claire Huxtable. She couldn't just be funny, she had to be dignified. She couldn't just be a mother, she had to be the perfect mother. She couldn't just be a wife, she had to represent an ideal of black partnership that many had never seen on television before. The irony wasn't lost on her. While the show was celebrated for showing a normal black family, nothing about their situation was normal. The level of scrutiny, the symbolic weight, the constant awareness that they were being watched and judged, it all created an atmosphere that was anything but natural. "People would come up to me and say, 'Thank you for showing us who we really are,'" Phylicia recalls. "But the truth is, we were showing them who we thought they wanted us to be." There's a difference, and that difference was something we all carried. This burden of representation affected not just her performance, but her personal life. She found herself constantly aware of how her actions might reflect on the show, on her character, and on the broader community she represented. It was a level of responsibility that few actors have ever had to bear, and one that she's only now beginning to fully process. Perhaps the most difficult confession Phylicia is making involves what she knew and when she knew it. For years, she maintained that the allegations against Bill Cosby came as a complete shock, that the man she worked with for 8 years was nothing like the person described in the accusations. But her recent statements suggest a more nuanced reality. There were things we all chose not to see, she admits carefully. Not because we were covering up anything criminal, but because we were protecting something we believed was more important than individual concerns. We were protecting a dream, a vision of what we could be as a community. She describes a culture on set where certain behaviors were normalized, where boundaries were often unclear, and where the power dynamics inherent in any workplace were amplified by the show's success and cultural importance. It wasn't that people were ignoring obvious warning signs, she insists, but that the environment itself made it difficult to distinguish between what was inappropriate and what was simply part of the entertainment industry's often blurry lines. We were all complicit in maintaining an image, she says, not necessarily in covering up crimes, but in preserving a fiction that we thought was necessary for the greater good. Looking back, I can see how that environment might have enabled things that shouldn't have been enabled. This admission represents a significant shift from her earlier, more defensive statements. For years, she insisted that she saw nothing inappropriate during her time on the show. Now, she's acknowledging that her perspective may have been limited by her own investment in the show's success and her desire to protect something she believed was culturally important. Phylicia's most painful confession involves her response to the allegations against Cosby when they first became public. Her initial defense of him, her suggestion that the accusations were part of a conspiracy to destroy his legacy, remains one of the most controversial aspects of her public career. Now, she's ready to explain why she reacted the way she did, and what it cost her. I wasn't just defending Bill, she reveals. I was defending 8 years of my life, a body of work that meant everything to me, and a cultural milestone that I believed was bigger than any individual. I was wrong to dismiss the women who came forward, but I was also terrified of losing something that felt irreplaceable. She describes the period following the allegations as one of the most difficult of her life. Friends and colleagues who had respected her for decades suddenly questioned her judgment. Students at Howard University, where she had recently been appointed dean, demanded explanations for her statements. The woman who had been celebrated for her wisdom and grace found herself isolated and criticized. I realized that my loyalty to the show and to Bill had blinded me to something more important: the need to listen to survivors and to acknowledge their pain, she says. I had spent so many years being the perfect TV mom that I forgot how to be a real person dealing with a real crisis. The professional consequences were severe. Projects were canceled. Speaking engagements were withdrawn. For the first time in her career, she found herself persona non grata in many circles. The woman who had opened doors for others suddenly found many doors closed to her. But perhaps the personal cost was even higher. She describes a period of deep self-reflection, of questioning not just her defense of Cosby, but her entire approach to her career and public life. I had to ask myself, who was I really? Was I Claire Huxtable? Or was I Phylicia Rashad? And if I was Phylicia, what did that mean? The overturning of Cosby's conviction in 2021 presented Phylicia with another test of her judgment. Her celebratory tweet about the legal victory reignited the controversy and forced her to confront the fact that her perspective remained fundamentally different from that of many of her admirers. I celebrated a legal victory, she explains, but I realize now that it looked like I was celebrating something much more troubling. I was so focused on the legal technicalities that I lost sight of the human impact. That's something I have to live with. This latest controversy forced her to issue another clarification, another apology, another attempt to explain her position. But she's beginning to understand that some things can't be explained away, that some choices have permanent consequences. I spent my whole career trying to be perfect, she reflects. Perfect mother, perfect wife, perfect role model. But real life is messier than that. Real people make mistakes, have blind spots, defend the wrong things for the right reasons. I'm finally learning to be human in public, and it's terrifying. She acknowledges that her relationship with Howard University became strained after her comments, that some students and faculty questioned whether she was the right person to lead the fine arts program. While she remained in her position, she had to work harder to rebuild trust and demonstrate that her past statements didn't reflect her current understanding of the issues. In her role as dean at Howard University, Phylicia has been forced to confront the disconnect between her public image and her private struggles. Students who looked up to her as a role model were confused and hurt by her statements about Cosby. Faculty members who had celebrated her appointment began to question her judgment. Teaching has forced me to be more honest about my own limitations, she admits. I can't stand in front of young people and pretend to have all the answers when I've made such public mistakes. Instead, I've had to learn to teach from my failures as much as my successes. She describes difficult conversations with students about loyalty, about the entertainment industry, about the complexity of legacy and reputation. These conversations, she says, have been more valuable than any she had during her performing career because they've forced her to be authentic rather than aspirational. I've had to tell students that the woman they thought they knew, the perfect Claire Huxtable, never really existed, she says. I've had to show them that real strength isn't about being perfect, it's about being honest about your imperfections and learning from them. This honesty has actually strengthened her relationship with many students who appreciate her willingness to be vulnerable and to admit mistakes. But it's also been a humbling experience for someone who spent decades carefully managing her public image. So what is the dark truth about The Cosby Show that Phylicia is finally ready to reveal? It's not a single shocking revelation, but rather a complex web of compromises, blind spots, and choices that seemed reasonable at the time but looked different in hindsight. The dark truth is that the show's perfection was always an illusion. The Huxtable family was never real. It was a carefully constructed fantasy designed to serve a purpose. The actors who brought it to life were real people with real flaws, real blind spots, and real limitations. The pressure to maintain the illusion created an environment where uncomfortable truths were often ignored in service of a larger narrative. The dark truth is that Phylicia and her castmates were so invested in the show's cultural importance that they lost sight of their individual responsibility to ask difficult questions. They were so focused on representing the best of Black America that they forgot to be vigilant about the worst of human nature. The dark truth is that the entertainment industry's culture of loyalty and image management can enable harmful behavior, not through malicious intent, but through willful blindness. The same dynamics that allowed The Cosby Show to break barriers also created an environment where concerns were minimized and questions were discouraged. At 77, Phylicia Rashad is still grappling with the legacy of The Cosby Show and her role in it. She's proud of the barriers it broke, the doors it opened, and the impact it had on generations of viewers. But she's also aware of the ways it failed, the truths it obscured, and the harm that was enabled by its success. I don't know how to separate the good from the bad, she admits. The show meant so much to so many people. It changed television, changed how America saw Black families, changed the trajectory of so many careers. But it was also built on a foundation that we now know was compromised. How do you reconcile those two truths? She continues to work, to teach, to influence new generations of performers. But she does so with a different understanding of her role and her responsibility. She's no longer trying to be perfect. She's trying to be honest. She's no longer trying to protect an image. She's trying to process a reality. The hardest part, she says, is knowing that my silence contributed to an environment where harm was possible. I didn't intend for that to happen, but intent doesn't erase impact. I have to live with that knowledge and try to do better going forward. This confession, this acknowledgement of complexity, of failure, of the gap between intention and impact, may be the most important thing Phylicia Rashad has ever said publicly. It's not the graceful wisdom of Claire Huxtable, but the messy honesty of a real person trying to make sense of a complicated life. After decades of carefully managed public statements, this might be the closest we'll ever get to the real Phylicia Rashad. Not the perfect TV mom, not the gracious public figure, but a flawed human being who made mistakes, learned from them, and is still trying to figure out how to live with the consequences. The dark truth about The Cosby Show isn't just about what happened behind the scenes. It's about the price of perfection, the burden of representation, and the ways that even the best intentions can lead to harmful outcomes. It's a truth that Phylicia Rashad is finally ready to face, even if she's still figuring out what to do with it. What do you think about Phylicia's confession? How do we balance the cultural importance of The Cosby Show with the uncomfortable truths about its creation? These are questions that don't have easy answers, but they're questions that need to be asked. And finally, after all these years, Phylicia Rashad is ready to help us ask them.